comes in the name of the Lord.
Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Can people make positive changes in their lives that really last? Dr. Mark Baker has been trying to answer this question for the past 25 years as a clinical psychologist. To discover the answer, he went on a quest to find people who have changed their lives in the most dramatic ways, ending up in the largest maximum security prison in the United States, located in Angola, Louisiana. Once the most brutal prison in the country, Angola was transformed into one of the most effective sites for rehabilitation in the United States. He uses stories from inside Angola, along with his decades of experience as a clinical psychologist, to share with readers the amazing human potential for change and personal growth. Drawing on themes of forgiveness, community, justice, hope, and spirituality, he shows all of us how to change our lives for the better, no matter who we are or what we've done. Dr. Mark Baker has received a PhD in clinical psychology and a master's degree in theology, as well as a certificate in psychodynamic psychotherapy. He serves as the executive director of the Rabbi Counseling Centers in Pasadena and Santa Monica, California. He's the author of several books, including Jesus, the Greatest Therapist Who Ever Lived, which has more than 2 million copies in print, and is the author of Overcoming Shame, Let Go of Others' Expectations and Embrace God's Acceptance. Dr. Baker joins us the second Friday of every month at the 12 o'clock hour, here to discuss his new book, You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison, and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. Here's my good friend, Dr. Mark Baker. Mark, so great to see you, my friend. One of the highlights of my month is to get to talk to my friend, my safe person, and in some ways we were womb mates without even knowing on two ends of the world that we were going to experience the same things, and that 60 years later we would be comparing notes and saying, wait a second, that was me. Hold on a second, that was my father. Hold on, wait a second, I went through that. And so we have developed this kindred relationship that brings a great deal of joy, and it brings joy to the narrative in covering of despair for many. That these conversations have become a light to many who thought that they were overwhelmed by hopelessness. And this story, which the title is, it's a definitive. It is a statement that there is no question mark. It is a proclamation. Where so many walk around and say, I can never change, my spouse can never change, people don't really ever change. And we bought into that lie for so long that we even have cliches. A leopard can't change its spots. We apply that to relationships and to people. And that really is a lie from the pit of hell.
It is a lie, and I wrestle with that and have had to wrestle with that. Well, just this week, I had a couple that have been married that got 5 kids. They're a Christian couple. They're coming in. They had to come in separately because they were so convinced that it was over. She's already talked to attorneys. I met with her, and she's desperately thinking, I don't know what else to do. Please help us. I meet with him individually, and he starts off by saying, I need to let you know now, no offense, but I'm not going to change. Says, this isn't going to change me. I'll enter this process, but I already know what I believe. I don't need you telling me I'm not going to change. And I could see, although he comes across as very confident, the veneer of confidence underneath that is this huge pit of shame. He's a fear that there's something so broken about him that he has to pretend that he's already got it together. I've got it all together. I can't change. I won't change. And so I said, I'll roll up my sleeves and try to help. But I think you've already made a prophetic statement about our relationship together. There's so many people walking around with that feeling that I can't or that I shouldn't change. I'm not the problem. She's the problem. And it just keeps us entrenched in sinful behavior and hurtful behavior. entrenched in horrible feelings about ourselves, and we put on this face of pretending that we're righteous, meaning we've got it all right, when that is never the definition of righteousness, never was. Righteousness is right relationship with God and others. We missed the point. Being open to change helps us start. And the fact that we can change, I'm so convinced of that now that I've been to Angola. I used to say, because people would come to me and we'd wrestle for years to try and produce change, as you said earlier, I don't have this miraculous difference between who I am now and who I was before, other than I have a God in my life who's helping me, which is a miraculous difference, but I'm still the same guy. So I used to say, well, people don't change, they grow. I'd give us all an out. Now that I've been to Angola, I say, no, no, you can change. I've seen it. I've seen people completely change from a murderer and a rapist and an armed robber that will hurt you to a man who would never hurt another person again, who's there to help you. I've seen people change. I believe we can all change. And I think there are principles that we can apply to all of our lives, that we can learn from those who have changed. Yes, we can change if we follow the guidelines.
I had a very interesting conversation. Peter Rosenberger has been married to his wife Gracie for over 38 years. She is a double amputee. She was in a car accident when she was 19, cost her both her legs, 100 surgeries, tens of millions of dollars in medical bills. And they met at music school in Nashville. He's a concert pianist and she is a vocalist. And he fell in love with her. And he married her knowing that there were going to be challenges to this marriage. They have beautiful children, but that there were going to be challenges. And he actually began to devote his life to caregiving. And because they were gospel singers and very entrenched in the church, he began to realize that he was struggling with a lot of caregiver overwhelmness, and admits all the time that if there were escape routes, he took them to kind of mask the burnout that he was experiencing, until he finally embraced that the caregiver needs caregiving.
Absolutely.
That if we're not, and there's 65 million caregivers out there, if we're not, and so he became the voice of the caregiver, and so he has a nationally syndicated radio program, written books on it, and has really taken it and turned it into a ministry. And when he and I first met 4 years ago, I could not imagine making that decision in my life, that I would have the capacity to make that decision of thinking that I might have to take care of someone, or even marry an amputee.
Right.
After 4 years of talking with him, and I shared this comment, I said, I now find the capacity within my heart that if I were to meet somebody that had a chronic condition or developed a chronic condition, that I feel that I now have the capacity to be able to provide care for that person. And their statement to me was that, well, you must have a personality disorder, because who would ever willingly or knowingly walk into that? And I realized that this was a true circumcision of my heart, that compassion for another person, to steward and shepherd another human being, was even a higher calling than preaching the gospel. That shepherding of a heart is the gift that God gave us when he said it's not good for the man to be alone. So he made us a shepherd of Eve's heart, and we're called to do that. And that's a high calling. That's the calling of a heart surgeon, is to hold life And I think what we do is when we don't revere this incredible gift, we don't have the impetus to change, nor do we have the tools to change, because they come from this stripping away of old thinking and accepting a new paradigm and a new life of, I am capable of that kind of love. I'm not going to put a posting out there that says quadriplegic 68-year-old quadriplegic wanted for a long-term relationship. But I know that if this were to come into my life, like a Charles Krauthammer, his life was quite extraordinary. John Erickson Tata, her life, and these others. I found that within myself, to be able to try on a new garment and have it fit when it wouldn't have fit before. So I do see change possible.
Yes, and I think you're speaking into something that's really important, is that you were inspired by seeing the quality of character in someone who devoted himself to that ministry of caregiving, and that's what inspired this. You got a little bit of a look into his soul and thought that made him a better person. It's not just, oh gee, what a generous guy and how altruistic of him. No, that path made him a better person because he chose it and he took it on. And you got a glimpse of that, thinking, maybe if I had that opportunity to take that, I could become a better person by choosing that path. The facilitating change and watching that happen makes us better people. I think God has built us to be looking for that. And to, when we're in its presence, it's transcendent. That God produces that change in him and in her and his caregiving for her, and all the change that happens there. It happens because God's there. Martin Buber says that when we have the I-thou relationship, God shows up, right? If I'm willing to have that kind of vulnerability and authenticity and be there for you in a way that's I-thou as opposed to I-it, God shows up and changes us, right? I absolutely believe that not only can we change, but facilitating that in the lives of others changes us. We all come better. And that's what I saw at the prison. These guys all wanted in. They all wanted to be a part of that. They saw a few guys starting to change, and they looked at their lives and they thought, I want to be like that guy. I want that guy who's never getting out. He's just serving a life sentence for murder. And yet he gets up every day and he's optimistic. He sees the difficulty in front of him he's not naive, right? But he's a changed person. And when you're around it, you want it. I want that too. That's how we were made to be. I think we're ontologically made to seek out that kind of transforming experience, and it's contagious. I saw guys who weren't Christian in the prison who still wanted to be like that. They wanted to be a part of that change. They wanted to be next to those guys, participate in a changed life, because it changes us to be around people who are changing others. It's contagious.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see this story unfold, because David Berkowitz, son of Sam, who's up in Austin, New York, serving 28 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, was a young Jewish man in his 20s that was self-admittedly demonically possessed, that took his instructions from a dog who told him who he should kill. And so he was caught, he was convicted, and while in prison, was ministered to and gave his life to the Lord, found complete deliverance. And this isn't the, I'm going before the parole board, so I need to have a conversion experience to leverage my parole. As a person knowing that it does not matter. So there can be no guile in him to go out now and become a intake minister for new criminals coming in to the system. And he's a chaplain, and he guides them and says, look, let me tell you who I was. I'm son of Sam. Sam was the dog. I was the demon possessed. But now I'm telling you that it's the gospel of Jesus Christ and the truth of this love and this compassion that brought me deliverance. I was legion. I had all these things, this demonic activity in my life, and when I heard the truth and it set me free, I knew that this conversion of my heart, I'm still David Berkowitz, I'm still Jewish, but now I'm a believer, and it's too much to contain. I can't just keep it for myself.
Right.
I have to spend the rest of the years of my life telling this story. And if that doesn't compel you, that the famous son of Sam is now a chaplain in a maximum security prison, never will see the light of day outside the prison walls, never sit before a parole board, doesn't have to make this story up, is living it and leading people to the Lord. So that kind of transformation turns into this kind of long-term change. As you looked at some of the people that you met, because you stayed there, you actually, I think you told me your wife questioned whether or not when you returned, should she have men in white coats waiting for you?
Yeah, about me staying in the prison. No, she was not. She and her sisters were praying for me at the time that I was there. Because you think prison and you think what a violent place, and certainly not as safe for an old white guy to go. I mean, I would be the target, right? In most prisons, that's true. I've been in other prisons, and they're scary, scary places. In America, typically, they're the most racist and violent places in our country. And we all know the recidivism rate is about 66%. So 2/3 of the time when they get out, there's no change that happened on these guys. They commit crimes, they go right back because it's a violent and brutal place. And Angola was like that. But after the warden came in 1995, Burl Cain, he came with a whole different set of ideas about what to do and how to treat people, and with the belief that we can change. He started off not with the typical attitude of most prisons is we're going to warehouse these guys because they can't change, so we're going to lock them up, and if they kill each other while they're there, well, that's what brutal people do. So it's accepted and sometimes even encouraged in other prisons. And he went into Angola, it was like that in the early 90s. He said, no, that stops. Now, I believe you can all change. You guys can change. And he brought and put in the middle of the prison a seminary. He got the local Baptist seminary to open up an extension in the prison where these guys could go to school, get educated, and get a degree in Christian ministry, and where they would do two things. They get educated, number one. Many of them were there because they weren't educated. And two, they're learning Christian principles of morality. And so that was his idea. I want to morally rehabilitate these guys. And along the way, teach them about who Jesus was and give them a model for how to live their lives. Well, today he's got over 200 college graduates living there in the prison, serving life sentence. They're not getting out, but they have a ministry there to live out the gospel in the way that they see is relevant in their lives living there in the prison. Completely transformed the culture there. When I was there, I didn't see a hint of violence. There were women walking around in the prison doing their job. Visiting women were there walking around in the main yard with their husbands. They have chapels there where they go to church, and the women were in chapel with their husband. No one said anything appropriate. There was no threat of violence at all. It was amazing. It was an amazing place. And you're right. The first time I went, my wife was pretty anxious about me being there. I got a text from my wife as I was standing there in the prison yard looking at these two chapels. There was a Catholic chapel and a Protestant one. And she says, my sisters and I are praying for you. You're so brave, she says in her text. And just as I get that text, there's a group of about a dozen junior high kids walking into the Catholic chapel for their confirmation class. Apparently they go there several times a year inside the prison where they receive confirmation. And I felt about as brave as a 12-year-old girl going to confirmation class right when I got that text. That's an amazing place where violent men, who are there for murder, rape, and armed robbery have changed, and the culture there is remarkably different from the culture they came from in the violent world in which they once lived.
Is this model being replicated? It certainly sounds like it should be. It sounds like it should. The prison system should be looking. Criminal justice system should be looking. Obviously, we can't expect our universities who give out criminal justice degrees to look at this model, because they would be considered to be Christian in nature and not in keeping with the academic, what would you call it, the sanitized academic view of the world. But as effective as it is in Angola, a concept of forgiveness, community, justice, hope, spirituality, restoring a man's manhood does not mean you're creating a Neanderthal. It's you're tapping into every gift that God has given every one of us, and acknowledging it.
I explain it all in my book, but it's a complicated issue. Why aren't other prisons doing this? If it's so effective, why aren't they doing it? Well, the warden has now left the prison, and he's created a nonprofit where he goes around, not just the United States, but other countries as well, sort of preaching his gospel of what he calls moral rehabilitation. His idea is, I don't want to give these guys better job skills. I don't want to even educate these guys. I want to morally rehabilitate them, because if they get out, they're just going to be better criminals if they're just more educated. But if they're morally transformed, they are better citizens in the world. So when they get out, they'll be able to assimilate and function. This is his emphasis. And he's in about a half a dozen prisons now. And he expects to be in 20 prisons, I think, in about the next 10 years. So that's his goal, to take his method of rehabilitation out to as many prisons that will listen to him. He's had dozens and dozens of wardens come to Angola to look at what he's done. And you can imagine where they hit the wall. It's like, oh wait, the core of your change is putting a seminary in the middle of my prison, where there's a very large Muslim population in the middle of my prison. You want me to put a Christian seminary? And most of them balk. They go, well, most of them aren't Christian, and so they don't get it. They sort of get the education piece, and many prisons have educational programs there, but just education doesn't teach morality. The Christian education, inherent in it, is morality. It's built in. That's why he brought it in. It's Christianity has a system of morality, and he'll say this. The warden says, well, atheists can be moral people. Of course they can, but they don't have a system of teaching morality like the church does. When we teach classes on modeling ourselves after Jesus, there's a comportment, a way of conducting himself that's inherently moral. And so it was a perfect fit for him. But and of course, we all know that Christians have been going into prisons since the time of Jesus. And he said, listen, I was in prison and you didn't come. What's up? So the admonition to go into prison has been there from the beginning. Well-meaning Christians have been going in the beginning, but nothing like this. And one of the stories I tell is about Carolina. It's really an interesting story of transformation. He went to one of these Christian missionary events where they come into the prison, and he sees it as pathetic. I don't want to listen to some middle-class do-gooder coming in and telling me about his pharmaceutical addiction problem, or his wife ran away with the milkman. Says, I found that putrid. He said, the thing I hated most is seeing a man cry. So he was sickened by seeing someone from the outside come in and tell him about the love of Jesus. Now, sometimes those are effective, sometimes not. But what's going on in Angola is the guy in the bunk next to you is telling you about it. The guy who's going to be there all day and all night is not getting in his car and driving home to his warm house. He's going to wake up there the next morning and the next morning and the next morning. And you're going to look at his life and say, is this real? Is this guy just, saying this to make himself look good at the parole board, or does he believe this stuff? And that is a powerful, powerful witness. And all the guys I talked to said they don't even talk about evangelism. They just live it. They just live it. These are my people, and I'm just living this life of a changed man among these people. That's my witness, is living a life that they're going to look at 24/7. If I'm a fake, I could get beaten to death here. So there's no fake here, and they'll know if it's real. These guys will know if it's real. Now that's what's different. That he's educating guys, morally rehabilitating guys, and turning them loose into the prison environment, and then it just does its own thing where it becomes a credible witness for a changed life, and the core of it is an encounter with God. And they're not apologetic about that. I'm motivated to be a different guy because I've encountered God in a way that is so real, so undeniable. And Carolina told this to me. I had an encounter that would not be denied. I met something I didn't even know. He said, I felt love, but I didn't know it was love because I'd never loved anyone before. When I encountered God for the first time, I was transformed, and it could not be denied. And now he lives a transformed life because of that. And that's what's different about this. So yes, other prisons have had Christian programs, and those programs, the ACLU has come in and protested against it because those programs often have been exclusive. Like we'll have a Christian dorm over here, and the Christian dorm gets special privileges because these guys are better and the behavior is better, but it's exclusive, right? Well, that's illegal. And what the warden says, no, we've got a Christian seminary. It's Christian, and it's in the middle of the prison, and it's free, by the way, because the Baptist seminary is doing this as a missionary outreach, right? So it doesn't cost the state anything, and anyone can come. So they've graduated Muslims, they've graduated agnostics, they've graduated anyone who wants to come, and that's what's different. And the ACLU comes out and they go, well, I guess we can't complain because it's not exclusive. And number two, these guys are different. When they looked around and they saw the prison atmosphere, the ACLU has complained about several things about Angola over the years. You can imagine, over 20 years, you're going to have complaints about something, but never about the seminary because it's changing lives in a way that's undeniable, and they welcome all who want to come and learn. And there's no exclusive nature of it, so they can't complain. So it's tricky. I would say it's only going to work in a prison where the warden gets behind it, where the warden gets the concept. He has to have some, at least, appreciation for faith-based programs, might put it that way. Otherwise, they're going to balk and they're not going to support it. And if the warden doesn't support it, it's not going to work. So Warden Kane now is going about the country, and he's got the statistics. I had a prison where we had 40 murders a year in my prison. We have none now. We'll go through a holiday weekend and have not even a fist fight in my prison. Says, anybody else have a low crime rate like that in their prison? When I was in the prison, the guards were walking around. I never saw a gun the whole time I was there. Never saw a gun. When I was in the prison yard itself, the main yard, I never saw a guard. I was on my own most of the time. Now, I want to also say there are people that don't change. I have to say that. We have what he calls predators. And these are the people that, as a psychologist, we would diagnose as psychopaths. Someone who doesn't feel guilt and has, we believe, probably some lesion in the brain, maybe in the amygdala. There's probably some damage from birth that prevents the capacity for guilt. Now, these people can look like they've changed, but they will still hurt you if they can. And he lets these people out into the main prison yard, and if they hurt people, they go back into the restricted areas. So there are people, I would have to say, that for reasons we don't fully understand, and we've had researchers look into that there are people who that maybe have some brain damage that prevents them from experiencing guilt. Now, but what I have to say is, like the case of Son of Sam, I've witnessed many cases like to talk to them face to face, people who've murdered several people who've changed. So whatever was wrong with them, demon possession or whatever was wrong with them, they lacked that brain damage that prevented the capacity to receive God and to repent of their guilt. The guy in Carolina is one of them who would have been diagnosed as a sociopath. Certainly had every one of the 7 sub categories of sociopathy. Completely changed. Doesn't have any of those characteristics today. Now that's the miraculous part. People that psychology can't explain. You looked like you were a sociopath, and now you have none of those characteristics. And it's been 10 years, and you've not displayed any of those characteristics. They have no explanation for that. You and I do.
Yeah, it's stunning. The largest hunting ground, if you will, for the advancement of Islam is our prison system.
Right.
And the value proposition is not Muhammad. The value proposition is not Allah. The value proposition is the same reason bars exist, is because people are starving for fellowship. They
Right.
want to belong to something, and so they're offered. You had an absentee father, you had a prostitute mother, you had a brother who was killed. You need a family, and so we're going to be your family, and if you join with us, we're going to give you that family protection, that family covering. You're going to belong. And they don't really understand what it is. They just see this connection that they didn't have before, and now they feel like they belong. And this is an area of Islamic evangelism that you go into the neediest, the poorest, the most broken places and offer them a value proposition. So you can't belong. We'll look out for you. We'll take care of you. And so I can see where there is going to be some reluctance, and unless there is that real buy-in and that transformation, because theirs is a presentation of something that's not real. This is a demonstration of something that is real. And
Right.
The authentic will always win over the counterfeit when they're laid and examined side by side. We're talking with Dr. Mark Baker, author of the new book, You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. If you've been led down the path of belief that you cannot change, that God made you this way, and that you are a person that struggles with anger or rage or addictions or self-destructive behavior or relational destructive behavior, or are just have a general reached a stage in your life and you've asked the question, there's got to be more to life than this, and you do believe in Jesus and you do go to church and you're just not finding the satisfaction, then it's really a clarion call from God to examine what's at the core of your responses and the core of your being, as to whether or not God really has your full heart, or if there is that little dark darling of the heart that sits off in the corner that is what's driving you without your consciousness. You don't know that it's going on, and help is available. Dr. Mark Baker and others like himself who specialize in taking a look at this shame core response that manifests itself as sin, anger, rage, and the lie that you cannot change. And that is a lie, because you can change. And if these murderers, if these rapists, if these career criminals, these life sentence criminals can go through a transformational process and a renewing of their minds through the washing of the Word, then you too, with the help of someone like a Mark Baker, someone in my life who counseled with me to effect change, then change can come and is available. And if you will accept that it can change, you can change, that that is the first step towards an understanding that there is a process and a path to take for real transformative change in your life. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to find out when we return, how do we apply some of these principles that Mark saw being applied in Angola into our own churches, communities, neighborhoods, families. How do we apply these principles to affect change in our lives? It's great to read about their lives, but how does it apply to us? We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Mark Baker, author of the new book, You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison, and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. You know, this is the first time, Mark, I've heard the term, the psychology of personal transformation.
Right.
That there is such a discipline of the psychology. I mean, we know that therapy and analysis is to affect change, but this concept of a psychology of personal transformation being built around some core component pieces that are not all psychotherapeutic, that are grounded in human behavior and our juxtaposition of ourselves in relation to another.
Right.
Is really at the core of this.
Right, it is, and and with that lens, I can observe and help tease out what are some of those principles that we can identify and name, so that we can use them in our lives. You know, the reason these guys would sit down and talk with me, and I talked with more than a couple of dozen guys in long interviews, at least hour-long interviews, sometimes 2 hours, is that they wanted others to benefit from their lives. They wanted to tell their story so others wouldn't have to go through what they went through. Many of these guys, most of them would say, I had to end up in prison to get this lesson. Please tell this story so others won't. And so they would want others to understand these principles. A good one is the difference between wishful thinking and true hope. Now, this is an important psychological distinction to me that I observed there in the prison. Now, these guys aren't using these concepts. They're not using this language. They're just living it, right? So one of the guys I encountered was a guy by the name of Hayward Jones. Hayward murdered his girlfriend, killed her with a knife, and he's in there for the rest of his life because of it. Horrible life circumstances, as you can imagine, fatherless, was in fights his whole life. And in one desperate evening, he makes a desperate act of trying to get his girlfriend to come back to him and wouldn't do it, and he just stabbed her. It was an impulsive moment, a young man that changed the rest of his life. And I've got many of those stories of guys who at age 19, 20, 21 did a stupid thing, drunk that night, and it cost them the rest of their lives. So this guy's in prison for the rest of his life. Once he's in prison, realizes that one of the most important things in his life, now that he meets God in prison, and God becomes real for him there. And once he's got that orientation now, and he's in a community of other guys, and that's really what makes this work. It's not just someone shared with him the gospel and he got changed and now he's a completely different person. He was in a community of changed men, and that's what makes it last. These guys then who encounter God, they see how life can be different, and then they're in a support group of 200 other guys who are trying to be different too, and that makes the change last for them, where when they start to fall down, they get support. And in that support, he realized the next most important thing in his life was to figure out how to be a father to his son. He had a son out there that he hadn't seen for 10 years because his girlfriend wouldn't even allow the son, told him his dad was dead, and they would cut off all contact. And he starts praying for God to help him be a good father to his son while he's in prison, serving life sentence. Well, that's an ambitious prayer, but it was what God put on his heart, and he started praying that prayer. So he doesn't pray that God will let him out. He doesn't pray that new evidence would be found that will overturn my conviction and that I'll then now be free to go. No, he prays, help me be a good father to my dad now in my circumstances. Now, what I got out of that is, now that's hope, not wishful thinking that someday I'm going to get out. Sometimes things are going to change. And when we use the word hope, there's an element of doubt in it. It's not an absolute certain that I'm going to get what I say, right? It's like, well, I hope I see you next week, right? So there's a little bit of doubt when we use that word hope in English. And I think there's an element there of what true hope means. It's like when he said hope, what he's saying is, I hope God will help me. I don't know the outcome. I'm not telling God what I think the outcome should be, but my hope is in God, that God will produce the outcome that's going to help my son. So he prayed that prayer. And then there was a guy who came up from his hometown that asked him, how can I help you? He says, help pray with me that I would be a better father for my son. So they started praying together this. And within a few months, he got a subpoena from the court saying, you need to respond to the care of your son, just out of the blue. Apparently, the mother of his son had addiction problems, and she had been institutionalized. The son had been thrown into the foster system, and the foster parent was being abusive to his son. And so the legal system found Hayward in prison and said, you've got a son who's in trouble, you need to do something. So he started an all-out campaign to get full custody of his son while he's serving a life sentence in prison. The warden would let him out to go to court when necessary, and Hayward would go to court and argue for the care of his son and try to make decisions. He went so many times to the court that everyone in the court knew him, knew who he was, and saw him as a caring father who's trying to take care of his son from Angola prison, right? He petitioned for full custody of his son. It's never happened before in the history of the United States where someone serving life prison would be awarded full custody of his son. And to make a long story short, He was. The judge finally was convinced this is a good dad. The way he advocates for his son, the way he's here for his son, the advice he's telling me he's giving his son. They put his son Taylor with Hayward's sister, that's where he lived, and twice a week the sister would drive him up to Angola prison where he could seek counsel from his father serving a life sentence in prison to keep him out of prison, because you and I know that anyone who's a child of someone who's in prison has a 6 times more likely chance of ending up in prison themselves, and he wanted to make sure that never happened. Hayward, while in prison, contacted an organization called Awana that teaches Sunday school lessons for people in Sunday schools. They came into the prison and developed with Hayward materials for inmates to be better fathers to their children while they're in prison. They developed what they call an organization that's called Malachi Dads. They have their own materials to teach inmate dads how to be better fathers to their sons. And those materials are in 150 prisons today. Now, that's true hope. A man who has the hope that God will come into his life and solve a problem for him. Not with some kind of wishful thinking outcome that you're going to get me free out of prison and let me tell you, God, what to do, because I got a plan. No, he says, God, I need your help. And I have hope that you're going to help me be a good dad to my son, when there was no evidence that that was going to be possible. He saw his circumstances and asked for God to intervene in the circumstances. Well, here's the lesson. True hope is not telling God what to do. True hope is believing that God is active right now in your life and in my life. And when I get up in the morning, I'm looking for God in my life. That's what true hope is. Not telling God what I want the outcome to be, but looking for God who's already active in my life. That gives me hope. That lifts my spirit. That lets me believe that God is active in my life. My hope is in that God is going to be in my life today, and I can look for those signs of God actively present in my life today. That gives me hope. Not me painting some fantasy picture of wishful thinking of what I think it should be, and then me telling God, and then me hanging my hope on a fantasy I've created. No, I want the reality that God's creating for me. My hope is in that. And what I saw was amazing. These guys serving life sentences, they know they're never going to get out. The most hopeful guys I'd ever run across, because they knew God was going to be active in their life that day. That's true hope. That's what you and I need to do, and everyone needs to assimilate and put into our lives. That kind of hopefulness, not wishful thinking that if only this or if only that, well, and then at that point in time, I'm going to really believe in God. No, God's in your life now, and if you look for him, you're going to be a more hopeful person looking for it. Hayward is an amazing example of that. And his son now is graduating from college, is a Christian, involved in a church, and got a good job, because he had the hope that God was going to make him a good father serving a life sentence in prison. You think you've got obstacles in your life? Believe me, God can overcome any obstacle. I've seen amazing stories to attest to that fact.
You know, this is really a commentary on purity of purpose. That when and it's interesting because I'm in Israel a lot. In Israel, the statement of "I'll see you later" is lehitrot, and the response is "Lord willing."
Right.
Say, I'll see you soon, or I'll see you again, and the response is always "Lord willing." This is common language in Israel. This is always that it's an acknowledgement that we are not in charge, he's in charge. And if it pleases him, I'll see you tomorrow. And if it pleases him, I'll wake up tomorrow. If it pleases him, I'll have another day. But it's a purity of purpose. It's relinquishing our agenda for his agenda in this matter.
Right.
Here is what the purity of my purpose is. I want to be a good father. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the tools to do it. I don't have any preconceived notion as to how it could possibly be accomplished. But this is the purity of my desire. And my hope is that you will hear me and you will provide for me according to the condition of the heart in which there's no guile in it. There's no selfishness in it. It is me stepping up to answering the call that was on my life the moment the child was conceived, but I live my life out this way. Now I'm hearing more clearly from God that this is my purpose, and now I want to be able to fulfill my purpose, but I have no idea how. So it's in your hands, Lord God, and you will provide. So there's hope with combined plus trust, and then patience, which is not the attribute of career criminals. Not high on patience. Wrong look, I'll smack you down. Wrong tone, you take a bigger scoop of potatoes than me. We got to throw it. So patience is not the high-ranking personality characteristic of a career criminal. But the fact that someone in those circumstances can provoke us to envy, to say, where's the purity of our heart in our requests?
Yeah.
What is the greater good in our petition before the Lord that is not selfish to meet my selfish desires and my agenda, but how can I play a part in saying the true desire of my heart, purity of purpose, purity in request, and then be persistent. He didn't just pray it. His friend came along and said, "Hey, you pray it with me. Maybe it's going to take two of us to form community and lift this up for." And who could have predicted such an outcome?
It's amazing, and you're right. There's a singularity in their vision, in their faith, in the way they live their lives. In a way, it was refreshing because it was so simple, it was straightforward for them. Now they have the advantage that there aren't a lot of materialism that competes for spirituality there. There are no cars, there are no houses, there are no, there's no posturing to try and get the girl, all that stuff. So it reduces their life to the basics. And it is true that when Jesus is your only thing, he's your everything. I mean, I saw that. I mean, these guys were the most committed, faithful men of faith I've ever seen, because they were like laser focused on their purpose for that day, is to live a life that's pleasing to God that day. And I would. You're right. I went away humbled by it. And the guy that there's now this whole national organization that grew out of this experience at Angola. There's a guy that works full time. Mike Broyles works full time, going around the country ministering to prisons, kind of trying to get this going in other prisons as a minister. And he said, I was a pastor for 30 years in the church ministry. I'm never going back to that, because these guys are all in, and I want to be around this kind of faith. And that's what I experienced. These guys are radically committed, because it works and they know it, and nothing compares to living this way with this kind of hope, this kind of faith.
That was Chuck Colson's takeaway, and why in his life his focus until his last days was prison ministry. That he had experienced it through his life and saw the potential for strip away all the distractions of life and get down to the essence of man. He's more reachable because he's less distracted. And that was the heart of his ministry. We've been talking to Dr. Mark Baker, author of the new book, You Can Change, Stories from Angola Prison and the Psychology of Personal Transformation. Do not buy into the lie that you cannot change, because you can. And if these men serving life sentences in what was once the most horrific prison conditions in the nation, and probably maybe even the world, can turn their lives and see real change in their character, in their synapses, how they think, how they process thought, how they measure responses. If it can happen to them, it can happen to you. You can get a copy of this book. You can visit drmarkbaker.com as well as ignitingnation.com. Click on today's program schedule, see his picture. You'll click on it and get right to a copy of the book. Mark Baker, always great to spend this Friday with you. God bless you, my friend.
God bless you.
Love to your family, and I will see you next month, same time, same place.
See you then. God bless.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.